Okay, so today, welcome to an awesome episode that we're going to cover in terms of future-proofing your career and education. We've had that series. We started off covering our first one on international development and the extension of international development and engineering and energy and so forth for our first episode in this series. This one is really, really important given all that's been happening in the economy and the business world. So what we're going to be covering today is really the new business norms and how to leverage your MBA for these new norms for this future. And with us today, we're going to have two phenomenal guests, good friends of mine and graduates from top business schools. So I'm going to, without further ado, I'm going to introduce you to our guests, Shaun Gilbert and Dalia Tarabai. Here they are. So maybe a quick introduction from you guys. Go ahead, Shaun.
Yeah, I'll start. So thanks everyone for joining. Shaun Gilbert, managing partner and founder at SKG Investments, where we focus on hotel investments, operations, and development. Got my MBA from Wharton in 2011 and my undergraduate degree in civil engineering from Arizona State.
Fantastic. Dalia?
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me. My name is Dalia Tarabai, and I'm a global business lead at Google based in New York. Basically, I look after global tech sales and strategic partnerships with food and beverage companies. And I have an MBA from Harvard Business School and a background in management consulting, in brand management, and in corporate finance.
Fantastic. Thank you both for joining me today. What I hope is going to be a really exciting discussion about your career paths, where we are, and where we stand today in this new economy, in this new COVID world, and really how to future-proof for our audience your career and your MBA path. So let me do a quick summary of what, again, future-proofing is for the audience. I talked about this in the last episode. I want to do that again, so to kind of provide context and layer for everyone. Again, the concept of future-proofing really started in the computer space and software and computers and so forth. And it really was trying to predict the technologies of the future and basically building that into the product that you are able to market and to bring to the market. But what I'm realizing is that given Moore's law, where every 18 months technology doubles and triples exponentially, the concept here is that it can be very much applied to your own career and to your own education. And so what we did from research is that we found in terms of your education, there are concepts that are very, very important that you want to be able to bring to the surface and think about while you're going through your education or even choosing which education path you want to take. So an author wrote about robot proofing and how important that is within the education system to be technologically savvy, have strong digital literacy, to be able to withstand any of the shocks or be able to catch up with what could potentially happen in any given economy and in a highly technologically savvy world. The concept of cross-functionality, which we'll talk about with our guest today, and the idea of design thinking, about how you come to problems from a multitude of perspectives. I always think about the ventilators that we're facing, the shortage of ventilators that we're seeing during this COVID crisis, and how many different people are coming from all different parts of society to really be able to create an innovative and cost-effective ventilator. So cross-functionality, bringing your skills, not just from one perspective, but from a multitude of perspectives. Then while you're in school, or let's say you graduate from undergrad, and these are a classic example of both Dalia and Shaun, they both reskilled and upskilled to stay marketable by going back to business school and being able to learn the hard skills and soft skills, complement what they knew, and or build up new acumen that they needed to be able to be more marketable and pivot in terms of their future. The concept of being locally based, but globally focused. Both these guys are based in the US. Dalia said that she's a global lead. I can imagine her clients, and she'll talk about this, are all over the world. Shaun's clientele are based here, but also he has touch points all over the world. And the same with us in terms of right track admissions, in terms of the work I do. All our clientele, many of our clientele, are based globally. So being able to stay locally, but have that global focus so that in case anything happens here, it's all about hedging. And finally, we'll talk about this in depth about the concept of networking, but really proactive networking and being in touch, checking out and being in tune with the economic trends, the social trends that are happening. So you're not blindsided by economic turmoil that that can take place. So without further ado, let me jump right into our two guests so they can tell you a little bit more about their educational path and how they ended up at their respective business schools, as well as their career paths in terms of where they are today. So let's start with you, Shaun. Tell us a little bit about your path from engineering at ASU to the MBA that you got at Wharton.
Sure. So, my career started pretty early on, and I was fortunate to know that I wanted to be in the real estate world, and I was very passionate about it from an early age. And there's a lot of different angles and facets to real estate. So I started in the construction industry very early on with my father's company, and really from there kind of understood and took the next logical step. I didn't try to cut corners. I didn't try to jump all the way to finance or acquisitions or development. I really was a construction guy and understood the next step would be engineering. We were out there building off of engineering plans out in the field, and to me the next logical step was engineering. So what I did was, as soon as I graduated from high school, went straight into civil engineering at Arizona State University. Really took the time and the energy to learn that skill set and how it applied to real estate. Once I was there, again, always with a kind of quantitative and finance or numbers-based approach in mind, I quickly graduated, moved on to development and land development, where I joined. And I graduated and kind of into what is like the 03 to 08 residential real estate market boom. So I joined a land developer then, quickly started to understand that side of it, from the acquisition side to the entitlement side to the governmental agency side of getting approvals and moving things forward, and kind of rode that wave. And we got acquired prior to the Great Recession. And I moved to Philadelphia to merge the two companies prior to the 2008 crash. But that's how I got into the market. Once there, understanding kind of how the world had changed, kind of like today, I knew I needed to pivot. I knew I needed another skill set in order to kind of not just survive, but thrive in the next economic cycle. So I put my application into Wharton. Jumped through a lot of hoops and a lot of hard work, but got in. And once there, really started to turn my focus on to the finance, acquisitions, and real estate side to really understand that part of real estate. So I've really kind of taken what was always a passion in real estate, and just slowly acquired knowledge in each aspect of it until getting to the MBA.
Fantastic. Thanks, Shaun. I mean, it seems there's a lot of logic and flow with what you've done, which is one of the main things that these business schools want to see, is that element of continuity, that you had an idea, that it wasn't haphazard, that you worked with your father's company, that shifted into a more of a civil engineering perspective. From that perspective, shifting over to how you can really merge it with real estate development, then moving over to Philly. And remind me, you were in Philly before you applied to Wharton? Is that what
prior to go to Wharton, the company that we were a West Coast firm prior to the acquisition, and then they were based out of Philadelphia. So I moved over to Philadelphia in 2008, kind of as the world was changing then, and and then ended up applying to Wharton and getting in 2009.
Got it. Excellent. And we'll go back to that, because what I want to discuss with you is that how you went from a civil engineer looking at real estate and then really delving into the finance aspects, where now, you're known as the numbers guy on any deal that you really jump into. Dalia, maybe you can tell us a little bit about your path in terms of where you started studying and then how you kind of ended up at Harvard Business School.
Yeah, sure. I think it's somewhat of an untraditional background. I graduated from AUB in 2006, and on-campus recruiting, I had two offers: either to join P&G and take the brand management entry-level job and work my way into this big company, which was everyone was encouraging of that path. But I also met with the CFO of a regional conglomerate based out of Kuwait, which is called Al Industries. And they basically, the CFO told me, I told him I had the P&G job lined up, and he said, listen, you can go and take the P&G route, and you'll be a small cog in a very big organization. Or you can come to Al Ghanim, where I promise that you will have a lot more of a generalist view and a seat at key decisions to be made in the organization at a very early age, and learn by doing, and sit across several functions if you want that. And so the role was a financial analyst role, which then quickly became a finance manager role. But it did just that. It was more of an analytical support role to the CFO and then to the president of the business. I had P&L responsibility. I was very young, of $1 billion in revenue at the age of 19, which is very, very young. I was supported obviously by mentors, and I had a lot of support from the CFO himself, and I got to work with sales teams, with marketing, and obviously with my finance function. And over that 4-year period that I spent with them, I really thought that I built and felt like I built a generalist business acumen that exposed me to different facets and areas of a business, and allowed me to hone a lot of the some leadership skills at an early age. I was managing a team of 20 people, most of whom were older than me. And from then on, I always knew I was going to pursue grad school, and I applied to Harvard Business School, and I got in. I got in at a very young age of 24 years old. And in hindsight, maybe delaying that in a few years, potentially I could have gotten more out of it. But at that time, I still did get a lot out of it, and I feel very privileged to have been able to go there, because the pros of it was that I also got like an early trajectory for my career. It set me on a faster trajectory. So does that answer your question, Hamada? Is there anything you want?
Yeah, that does that phenomenal job. So again, remind me, you were a finance major at AUB, right?
Yes, I was.
Yeah, and just for the audience, AUB being the American University in Beirut. So you were a finance major there, and then you said, you graduated at 19 years old?
Yeah, I did. I moved around a lot as a kid, so I graduated pretty early. I was still actually 18 at the time. By the time I joined, I turned 19. But I was, I moved around a lot, and I skipped a few classes. That's how it happened.
Yeah.
By chance.
That's a conversation for another day, because obviously we've had quite a few parents ask us if their kids should skip certain grades, and how it is for somebody to be younger with a group of older folks, what that does and so forth. There's a lot of interesting information from that perspective in terms of knowledge building and so forth. But let me start with you, Dalia. So you maximized your time. You took an opportunity that was more of it's a family-owned business, right? It's one of those family-owned offices. It was based in Kuwait, over $1 billion in assets, or I guess capitalization, over a traditional P&G, Procter & Gamble job in the Middle East. What was that position going to look like? Was that a finance position?
No, it was in brand management.
In brand management.
Level, yeah.
Okay, so you go over there, you take a shot, you go to this family office in Kuwait, you work with them, and I think would it be safe to say, because you took a little bit of an untraditional company, it sets you apart in terms of your business school application?
I think so. It's less the company and more what I did there, I think. Just getting a lot of exposure to different functions, managing large teams at a young age. I remember my essays, especially around the mistakes. Like, I got to do mistakes early and learn from them that had consequences. And you know how business schools, and at that time, that was one of my essay questions. And so I do think that large responsibility at a young age, exposure to different sides of the business And I got to work on my leadership skills early, make mistakes early, and learn from that. I would say was the recipe for me.
Got it. Shaun, what about you? Tell us a little bit about when you got to Philadelphia. I mean, it's almost too much of a coincidence that you're in Philly with the company, and then you get to apply to the school of your dreams to go to Wharton, which is just down the street. Not many people are obviously working in Philly and then end up going to school in Philly. So how were you able to kind of write about that transition and trying to convince an admissions committee to move from an engineer and feel confident enough that you would be able to excel in a business environment?
I think similar to Dahlia, when I joined the company, it was a land development firm of 5 people. I was employee number 6. By the time we sold in late 2007, there was 350 employees. So I was a 23-year-old at that time, and I had experienced a lot. Like, it was, again, talking about embracing rapid change. It was a different type of change, but at the time, growing that fast and really not knowing what I'm doing, I made a lot of mistakes. And, but again, mistakes are part of it, and you really do learn from them. And so I think I did have a lot to talk about, and it wasn't, and it was different. I was always going to have to be that different application going into Wharton, where I had a unique angle because I wasn't kind of a pedigree that had the undergrad school and had the right job prior to applying to MBA school. So what I really had was experience, failure, and a leadership capacity at a very young age. And you grow up quick. You really do when you get put in situations. I mean, I went from, really, really good times during that stretch and learning a lot and making a lot of great positive steps forward to being, basically the face of a very failed acquisition and the only guy that was there in person in Philadelphia. I mean, I did not understand the underlying things that were going on in the market at the time. I was just too young to understand them, but I chose, because I was very ambitious, to move to Philadelphia to help merge the 2 companies. And, it was a failure, and there was just a tidal wave of stuff that you couldn't really fight. And so I had a lot to talk about, and good and bad, of what I experienced over what was a 4-year period at a very young age. So I think that struck a chord. I mean, I always try to think several steps ahead strategically. So as I was taking the job in Philadelphia and being a real estate guy, Wharton was always on the top of my list. So I always like to have optionality, always like to think 3 steps ahead, because you truly don't know where you're going to be a year from now. I've thought that way my entire life, and that's no truer. I mean, it's as true today as it ever is, really, thinking about where we were a year ago and kind of the plans. All of it goes out the window. All you can do is continue to move forward. And so I think some of it was luck, and in real estate, timing is everything. But a lot of it is strategic and really being thoughtful about not the next step in front of you, but 3 steps in front of you. So when I got to Philadelphia, I quickly, even before everything was falling apart, I was studying for the GMAT, making sure I had my references that I knew would be there when I needed them, started to think about the essay questions, and so on. So.
Got it. And let me just ask you one more question on that front, Shaun, which is, you applied during an economic crisis. Some of the failures you had were as a result of the economic crisis of 2008, and you matriculated in 2009. Maybe just a quick point for people who are going to be applying this year in this economic crisis. What should they be thinking about?
Yeah, I mean, I think don't be scared to talk about how things are going for you, and be honest about the truth, because this is, again, in my industry, this is worse than the last 2 shocks to the system combined times 10. In the hospitality world, we're at the front line. And to think that, no one wants to hear that you've gotten out of it unscathed. You want to get to the other side, but it's hitting everyone and it's affecting everyone. So don't be scared to talk about those because you learn from it. You really do. I learned from 2008, and I went into this not knowing it was going to happen, but I think of everything I do in an economic cycle, and thinking we had the greatest economic run before all of this. It had to to end. I mean, one of my great mentors, his saying is always, no tree grows to the sky. So we were 11 years into this economic recovery. We knew it had to end. We didn't know how it was going to end, and it was abrupt and quick. So I think you should talk about those things. I would say, in hindsight, I entered in business school in 2009 and got out at 2011, and real estate was still a bad word. I mean, I was at what was arguably one of the better real estate business schools, and there was maybe 10 or 12 of us. Everyone else was shifting gears because no one wanted to touch real estate. But I knew what I wanted to do. I knew I had followed a path where I had a very solid foundation to continue to grow that. And real estate's real estate. So, I mean, really have a goal in mind, have a thesis, and you just got to kind of push through the uncertainty in it. And I would say to try to convey that in the essay questions, in your interactions with the admissions committee, et cetera, is important.
Dali, anything to add to that?
I fully agree with all of that. I do think keeping a long-term view beyond like the exit is also important. I love what Shaun said about cycles, but even things beyond this economic recession, we will hit good times again. The economy will eventually recover. We don't know when, nobody knows. But staying true to where do you want to go and what makes you passionate and where do you want to be long term is important to think about as well. The future, and I know that that's difficult to keep that long term perspective when there's a crisis, but I would advocate for keeping that in mind even while you're thinking through how to navigate the near term options that you have.
So going back to you in terms of your experience at business school, now let's kind of bring it up to speed. You entered, you had a finance background, and then you slowly start to shift to strategy or something into that effect. I know that's what you pursued in your career, but how did you maximize your time at Harvard? Maybe what were the 2 or 3 main takeaway points that would be applicable, especially in terms of future-proofing your education for our listeners?
Yeah, I think the first point would be, I had a finance background, a corporate finance background, but I did not shy away from getting into the more finance courses and getting into the numbers more, because I do believe that learning to love numbers is extremely important. And a lot of people that don't plan on going into finance but do want to go into business kind of loathe working with numbers or try to steer clear from them. And the trouble with that is, as you reach mid-management level, executives really look for senior management roles and those whom they want to develop and to give responsibility and to grow as business owners. And that requires, getting into owning a P&L and honing the critical thinking and the numerical reasoning that comes with that. And so that is something that I leverage and that I further and double down on and helped me later on in life. Even though right now I'm in sales and I went into consulting, it always came in handy and sort of gave me an edge. At the same time, I think I took some courses that were maybe not the most popular at the time, but and those were additional courses as well. Some electives that I've taken around technology, around building, macro trends in Excel, and some skills that I was still kind of like figuring out and didn't get enough exposure to in my previous job. And those really, really paid off, because I think, in coming from the previous generation, that you could build an enterprise and not be personally, tech savvy. I think these days are gone. You need to be very familiar with technology. And even I found myself, whether in consulting or later on, obviously at Google, very much immersed, even though I was on the business side, in the world of technology. And from, using even SAP functionalities to Salesforce platforms. And I my something that really came in handy to me was flexing on tech and getting ready on tech, because tech is the forefront and the future. And I think something else that came in handy, which was very, very important, is not ignoring those soft skills, which you alluded to, Hamada, earlier, that really get built through the networking that you do. And, authentic networking is something that I value a lot. And it is putting into a networking opportunity as much as you get. And we can get into that later. But I think leveraging your network, but also honing your soft skills in terms of how to deal with people, how to manage, how to building that voice, that presence of yours, and sort of testing that out with your classmates, and learning from the social cues, learning from the feedback, seeking mentors in that space is extremely important. And especially as we project into the future, not only did it come in handy as I grew into my career, I found that the technical skills are easy to learn, and easy to teach, but it's those soft skills that are always the most difficult to teach. And I feel like early on in your career, you need to pick up a lot of the habits and train yourself so that you can hone those skill sets. And the longer you wait, the more difficult that becomes. And so those have really, really paid off for me. And if even I project towards the future, in a world that's moving towards, machines taking over, a lot of jobs, it is those softer skills that will differentiate people, and that will over the machines, and that will be the strategic, competitive advantage that will land you the opportunities in the future. I already see that happening now, especially, and it becomes increasingly important as you rise in the corporate echelons. But I believe it will be more so in the future.
Shaun, what about you? What was like your top soft skill? Let me ask you this. Two questions. Dalia mentioned that one of the things she did was she tried to future-proof before the term was even cool by actually taking some of those technology classes at Harvard. That's the cool thing about Harvard. When I was there, I was able to take a course at the business school, take quite a few courses that were really outside the scope of the public policy degree that I did. And it was kind of part of their one Harvard policy that you can take courses on a bunch of different areas. If you kind of did that on technology, what was the kind of outlandish course that you took at Wharton that you thought would also help you in the future? And then also, what was your favorite soft skill or one of the the best techniques for developing your soft skills when you were at Wharton?
Yeah, look, I think Dalia nailed it. I mean, everything she said, I that's how I approach things. I mean, I'm a very introverted human being, very much tied to quantitative analysis. I mean, I was a nerdy engineer, happy to work in my spreadsheets throughout my career. I think the quantitative analysis side and the numbers is just kind of a given now. You need to understand it. So I think having the soft skills is really what will take you to the next level. So I would say, I don't know that I took any outlandish classes at Wharton. I think the actual experience was a bit outlandish. I think it really helped me with the social aspect of things. I think, like she said, you kind of you have an emotional intelligence, understand social cues, kind of see what works and what doesn't. It's a very eclectic mix of individuals, all with, business savvy type people. So the social side of it was very kind of eye-opening to me and very helpful, not just from a networking point of view, but just kind of understanding how everyone thinks and getting to know them outside of class, because these are the future business leaders. And one of the best things I've learned about, learned from an MBA is understanding how the guy across the table is kind of thinking through things. So it helps you a lot in negotiations. It helps you a lot when you're managing people. So the social aspect of it, the emotional intelligence, is really the way to kind of stay relevant, which to me is future proofing. I mean, I kind of walk through what I do, and really every business decision I think can be understood from a quantitative or just a math problem, and then you got to layer on the critical thinking to understand the data, understand the information that was handed to you, and say, okay, now layering on the human being aspect, how do I solve this problem based on the data in front of me, and thinking through it critically on that regard. And then from there, how can technology help me, and embracing it. And then after that, it's really, for me in the real estate side, a lot of it's politics, a lot of it's governmental agencies. There's a lot of people behind the counter at the government that could really stall your project, could put you in a very tough position. So if you don't understand how to deal with them in a humble way, I mean, no one cares where you came from or what you did or how much money you have into a project. They care about being treated like a human being, and a lot of them want to help you if you're humble about it. So that's that interaction and that type, which is some of the riskiest parts of real estate deals and approvals, is dealing with city councils, dealing with politicians. We call it entitlement period. So that part won't go away, and that's really where I've cut my teeth in my career, is kind of just going in, knowing, having an in-depth knowledge about every aspect of the project is very helpful to go in and talk to all these individuals. They see that you care, they see that you truly understand it, and as an owner, they like to see and hear from you. So there won't be any way for robots to kind of replace that part of it, especially as you deal with politics and government agencies. So
let me jump in there, and let's take it, because you talked a lot about government agencies and so forth. You mentioned that. Maybe tell us quickly. So you wrap up your MBA, you get a job at Wells Fargo's real estate development division, Easdale Secured in New York. Tell me a little bit quickly about that, and I want to kind of get into the juice of why I put this awesome little picture over there in the upper right-hand corner of the screen. So maybe you can tell us a little bit about that, and then we'll shift back to Dahlia in terms of her trajectory as well.
Yeah, so at this point, again, with always real estate in kind of mind, I had been through the construction industry, I had been through the development side of it. I started to learn the finance and investment side in the real estate program at Wharton, and then I joined the real estate investment banking firm Easdale Secured in New York City, and that's really where I understood the fourth part of real estate, and it came down to financing, debt, equity, and investment banking side of it, and how you get projects financed, how you keep them funded. And I really use that to really focus on hotels. I mean, that's where I learned the hotel business from a high level, doing large scale projects in New York and Miami, understanding the game, understanding how everyone works, and really building a lot of relationships. At about the same time I was doing that, that's where Airbnb really started to take off. And so I started to kind of, as I went through these projects, I started to really build a thesis on how Airbnb was going to affect the hotel industry. I thought it was a game changer, and early on, no one really took it serious. So I started to think, okay, there's really two ends of the spectrum, these big full service Marriott hotels I'm building, and then there's Airbnb on the other side. And I really thought there was a lot of white space in the middle that needed to be filled with these kind of independent boutique hotels that offer great experiences. So when I left New York and moved back to the West Coast and started my own company, that's really the focus of the company. And again, always tied to quantitative analysis. So I went through, there's these star reports is what they're called in the hotel industry, but they give you all the data. They tell you how hotels perform from an occupancy and rate, and therefore you can project revenue and figure out the expenses. And so I used data to really go basically investigate the entire kind of Southern Cal market to find great opportunities. And one of them where the numbers just made sense was in Malibu. So I, went about kind of finding, starting with data and saying, okay, this is a market I want to be in. Let's go find it. And then I just really had to turn over rocks, meet people, talk with owners, got rejected several times until I finally, was able to acquire a property in Malibu for a boutique hotel concept, and that's the picture up in the right hand corner. It's, currently we're under construction again, and having to pivot again with the COVID crisis. Really, I mean, luckily we were under construction and we're open, just finished opening into what could be an irrelevant product. So we're constantly having to think about what the world looks like in the hospitality world from a technology point of view. How do you get comfortable, contactless check-in, where a lot of people were moving towards these full service experiences with 5 people talking to you before you even get to the front desk. Well, is that really what people want now? And I think we're going to swing to an extreme when we reopen, and I think we'll settle somewhere in the middle. But you have to have the technology in place or you'll quickly become irrelevant.
Thanks, Shaun. Yeah, I mean, just by way of background, the reason it's under construction is, lo and behold, a fire ravaged Malibu in November of 2018. The back of the hotel was burnt. I know this because Shaun is my brother-in-law, and so we kind of all went through this as a family. And it's a hell of a story because thank God for the Los Angeles Fire Department that were able to kind of come in there in the pinch and were able to put out the fire. Probably destroyed about 10, 15, maybe up to 20% of the hotel from the backside of it. But Shaun's been working really hard with the city officials in Malibu to be able to work through permitting and getting all that stuff sorted out to get the hotel back online. And the hotel looks like it's going to be back online over the summer. But as Shaun said, you've got to be really able to adapt. That's another massive, massive issue. And we'll talk to Dalia about this as well. But the ability to adapt, to be flexible, to put all the learnings that you have, the emotional intelligence, the hard skills, the technological skills, and so forth, to be able to rescue yourself in an otherwise very difficult environment, as Shaun has been facing with Native. Maybe, Dalia, we can shift it over to you, and you can tell us a little bit about, so, you graduate, you have that finance background, you're all finance all the time. Then you graduate from Harvard Business School and you go into the consulting space. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about the consulting space and then talk a little bit more about what you're doing at Google right now.
Yeah, I think after graduation, I didn't have that traditional background going into business school. And at the same time, I wasn't ready to commit to an industry yet. That generalist high that I had in business school kind of lingered with me, and I wanted breadth over depth, at least for a couple more years. I knew that much. Consulting made perfect sense. I went back to the region, to the Middle East, based in Dubai with Booz Allen Hamilton, and I did consulting for around 3 years over there. I think what I got out of it is that 60,000 foot view into a problem, the structure, the strategy piece, and a lot of important transferable skills, in the face of key problems. How do you seemingly, surmount roadblocks, and how do you communicate with others, and different kinds of people. We were on different projects, every couple of months. And when in conflict, for example, how do you deal with conflict at work, with clients internally? How do you come up with creative solutions when resources aren't readily available, especially in the region, in the Middle East? And so I got a lot out of the 3 years, but I was missing. I felt after 3 years I was ready. It's on the cusp of when usually everyone tells you either stay on till you become a partner or you go into an industry. And right around that time, I knew I wanted to. I was on a project with Nestle in the region, and it was around digital marketing and looking at their digital marketing strategy. And I joined them for a little bit for 9 months, extended that, and quickly realized that CPG was not for me because it was very slow moving. And I realized that the other side, which is the tech side of the digital space, not the manufacturer side, is where all the activity was happening, where the frontiers were being pushed. And that's when I kicked my network into gear, and Google was looking for someone to run their consumer packaged goods sales division within Google Dubai, which was a very small office, around 50 people at the time. It has more than tripled by now. And if you had asked me, like, would you have gone into tech, or would you have gone, I was always interested in tech, and I made sure I was interested in tech because the world was pivoting there. But I did not see myself like going into tech until that opportunity opened up. And I went for it, got in, and I quickly figured out that it was a great blend of consulting experience where we had to, structure deals with different clients across my business, and like structure, understand what's going on in the landscape, understand how our technology can support those different clients, and come up with the right deals for partnerships with them. And I found myself enjoying that a lot. The only issue was that MENA was feeling too small when in general, but increasingly so as I hit my 5th year back in the region. And I wanted bigger and broader. And I wanted to be where the HQ was, where, all the senior leaders of tech were. And this is when I found a global role within Google. It's still on the sales and strategic partnerships side, and I applied. That was a year after after being with Google Dubai and MENA. And my reasoning was, which I do think speaks to future proofing, is that location is no longer a deal breaker. I mean, especially now, if you look at so many businesses being thrust into a work from home dynamic, and all the hesitancy around virtual teams, and that playing out of our psyche, remote work, and having that ability to operate at a global level, which I do a lot of. Even pre-COVID, I did a lot of just having by virtue of having a global role, but even more so now that we're working from home, I think gives you an edge to be able to navigate different cultures, whether the teams that report into me sit in different cultures, or the clients that I work with across regions, come from different cultural backgrounds. That it undoubtedly broadened the landscape of my previous geographic limitations, and gave me an edge within Google. It is something definitely that is earmarked, as in Dahlia is globally plug and play right now, and sort of gives me an added advantage over other candidates.
So let me ask you this, and we just got this question right now. Do you feel that since a lot of the work that you do and a lot of the stuff that you've been talking about is about touch points with people and interaction, that human intelligence that comes through, or emotional intelligence that comes through in terms of interaction with people. Now that Google offers the opportunity for people to stay at home for I think all of 2020, do you feel that is breaking up, or do you feel that that's even more amplified because you have to use certain social cues and connections with people when you talk to them on Zoom, or you talk to them by phone and so forth, now that you're more based at home? That's one of the questions that we got.
We have a very googly terminology that's called 10x. We always think, 10x and moonshot. How do we 10x something? And definitely that has 10x for me. It has definitely been multiplied exponentially, because I don't think it's necessarily what I'm talking about, those transferable skills and that EQ, isn't just about presence. It's about the thinking and the thoughtfulness around emotional intelligence, and which also Shaun alluded to as politics. How do you manage and navigate organizations, whether your own, your clients? How do you always stay with a growth mindset that is focused on win-win solutions? And you make sure that the people that you work with, whether on your team, whether it's peers, whether it's reportees, or whether it's clients, understand that you are bringing value to the table and that you're going to help them. And Shaun alluded to the humility that needs to come with that, and which I thought was spot on, and that intuitive win-win approach that you need to start off of. Like, that needs to be your base. And I do think, like, obviously that presence, that physical presence that we had before, you can pick up on a lot more cues than you can do now. But I do think now it's more important to pick up on cues, on motivation levels from your teams, on what your clients, in different regions might be going through completely different things. My clients in Asia are going through a different set of challenges than the ones in the US or in Europe right now. And so being able, it has not broken down. If anything, you need to have that strong base. And it has become even more important to exercise emotional intelligence because you have that screen and you don't have that personal connectivity. And that comes with thoughtfulness. I have on my calendar, this is a tip, I don't know if it's helpful to anyone, but I have thinking time blocked out where I get to think about this stuff. I get to think about, zoom out and think about the big picture, think about what my team is feeling like. I do sentiment touch points. How are you feeling with my team all over the world? That's how we kick off team meetings. 3 words, a word cloud of how everyone is feeling. I do that with my clients as well. And I think there are a few tactics that you can bring in to help you surmount the screen challenge, the challenges brought about by the screen. But I do think now they're more important than ever.
And that's a great segue. I want to kind of plug in this. I met you, Dalia, because we both volunteered to help refugees in the island of Lesbos in Greece 3 years ago. And I think, as always, for you, compassion, humility, and being able to relate to people, whether they're people that you're working with as clients or people that you're working with who are suffering, social ills and so forth, which you can imagine is even more today than ever before. Also, you created, I believe, an organization or a group within Google to help folks who want to consider applying to Google and getting into that system, that ecosystem. And you take time out of your day to do that for a lot of individuals who are considering the move to Google and the whole googly world I remember you telling me about previously. So we appreciate you for that. And I think those skills that you've been able to bring to the fray have very much helped your ability to be sensitive, as you said, through, even though it's, through communication like Zoom and so forth, you've been able to have those touch points, that compassion, that empathy, that emotional intelligence to make sure that the team is kind of on the same page. Let me shift to Shaun. And you're based in Santa Monica. Your hotel's in Malibu. You work, I believe, with another organization as well that does real estate development throughout California, but also nationally, OTO. But you also interrelate with your team. You have to go out to the project site even with the COVID limitations. But maybe you can tell us also quickly about what are maybe some feedback about the small business world and the interactions and kind of how to keep your small business running, especially in this challenging time.
Yeah, it is. I mean, it was very much, and I was used to being very hands-on, doing a lot of things in person. So to talk about pivoting in this world, it's one of those things where it's something where to be able to understand what people are going through and what their mindset is, you have to ask a lot more questions, and you got to listen a lot more when you're on these calls and Zoom meetings. So it's not like you're not able to take those cues that you were able, if you were in person with them and kind of seeing how they're feeling or doing. And a lot of times, in a business sense, people don't necessarily want to let in everything that's going on with their mind. So from that aspect, it is, it is challenging, but it's a challenge that you kind of need to see your way through and ask the right questions and listen a lot more. And I think it was a learning curve at first, but dealing with my own employees and the city and all of these public officials, it was a learning curve for everyone, but I think we're getting there. From a small business perspective, there is obviously a lot of people are hurting, especially small businesses in the hospitality and retail sector. I would say it's really an endurance race. Right now it's about kind of surviving and making it to the other side. I've been through a couple kind of black swan events between 2008, the fires in 2018, and again today, where I've had to constantly pivot, but constantly look for the silver lining. I've used all those experiences to kind of find my way through it. And in 2018, there was a lot of government aid that's out there, but it's extremely tedious and extremely difficult. And there's a lot of details and a lot of nuances to working with that and getting that aid, but it is there. There's a lot of aid and financial aid that you can get through all these crises, but no one's going to come help you and hold your hand, really. They didn't in 2018 and even in 2020, as I've applied for different funds. You got to go get it, and you got to be willing to kind of grind it out and get through all of it and do the paperwork, deal with the people. It is really difficult and really slow. I mean, that's kind of been the definition of government. But if you can make it to the other side and get everything you need, it's extremely helpful to help you survive. There is a strong benefit to doing it, but it takes a lot of work and a lot of patience. That's really what I'm working through now is, we had a plan and we were pushing through. And then when COVID hit, I had to switch. And now it's about finding the funds, finding the banks, the insurance, and trying to figure out all those details that are really tedious. How you use all this stuff to help solve your problem to get to the other side.
Amazing, thank you. Let's bring it home, and we've talked about and we've interspersed all these points throughout the conversation over the course of the conversation today. Let me ask you guys, and I think we've done a great job of kind of applying these points in real life examples that you guys have been through the trajectory of your careers in terms of where you are today. Shaun, let me ask you at least one of the points in the education takeaways that you've talked about as well, which is the networking aspect. And I also want to quickly ask you, Dalia, about that concept of authentic networking. But tell me a little bit about the networking and what you've been able to do. Maybe again, we keep going back to the hotel because I think it's such an incredible story of how you're able to get the side of the city of Malibu, which is typically reticent to have hotels and to work with hotels and so forth. There's only 4 hotels in Malibu. So how were you able to really network effectively in an academic setting that was able to teach you the skills, and kind of like maybe some takeaways for those who are going to be going into an MBA program when they're going to be possibly the first semester of which is going to be behind a screen?
Yeah, I think the business school in Wharton in particular really helped me a lot with the networking side and really being authentic, because there's so many different avenues and so many different ways to network and events. But after the first couple months, you kind of settle in and you start to have that authentic networking with groups and people that align with your values or your or what you're doing or your career, and then you really have these deep relationships that once business school is over, it kind of spreads out, and you have this network of really ears that you can, that'll listen to you and give you their 2 cents. And that's been very important to me. With Malibu, I mean, it is in the real estate world, it is probably the most difficult city to do business in. Before any crisis or before I had any problems, I was in the city on a weekly basis, getting to know everyone, letting them know me, getting to know me as a human being. And again, that's just my nature. I'm very detail oriented. I want to know every aspect of it. I don't hand things off to consultants unless I know exactly what they're planning on doing, or if I haven't done it before. So that was just my nature. So it was very authentic in my approach to the city. When I first bought the property in 2016, I would always go in there. If there was something that they thought I wasn't doing right, I would go in, look them in the eye, tell them, there was a learning curve. Didn't mean to do that, but I take full responsibility, and they really appreciate that. And then when 2018 hit and the fire hit the hotel, all those relationships were extremely key to getting a lot of things approved and making sure I stayed on the fast track. So I was application number one after the fire. That's because I had all the relationships in place and they were authentic, and I wasn't coming them with this, it was an emergency, but it wasn't the first time they've heard from me. It was the 30th time, and they got to know me over the course of the 2 years before. So, you wanted, you obviously on the business side of things, it needs to be productive and it needs to be for a reason, but it also can be authentic. You can get to know these people, and you can be, the human being aspect of this, especially in my field, can't be understated. You can go from something taking 5 years, if you know the right person and you're really hands-on, it can take a year and a half, and that's what we saw. What we've gotten approved in Malibu is usually a 5 to 7 year process, highly political, highly a lot of neighbors getting involved, but if you manage the process right and you have the right people, you can get through it. So, the networking was key. And again, it was authentic in nature. And then now I'm dealing with having literally gotten to the other end of all the politics and getting everything approved. Now I'm dealing with, hey, look, I need to make sure I have a relevant project. And I need to make sure that I can succeed after all of this, because the world has changed. To what extent, I don't know. But, so I'm continually talking with those people. They're continually giving me their feedback. I'm continually telling them where I am in the process. And so it's key. You can't underestimate at a certain level in your career where networking and having those relationships, it helps you continue to move things forward.
Excellent. Thank you. And Dalia, the one I want to kind of harp on, we've talked a lot about the ones in terms of the career takeaways. You've provided us with a lot of input and optics on what each one of those looks like. One of the ones I want to kind of focus on, and just if you can give me a couple of parting words on it, was just the professional maturity point that you raised. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I think understanding that what you want to do with your career and what your aspirations are is not the end all be all. There are other factors that come into play at a certain organization. There are business conditions. There are external factors as well, such as economic circumstances that take place that might delay or sort of force you to pivot on what you want or where you aspire to be. I think being cognizant that and agile enough, but also being cognizant to exhibit that maturity, that understanding that it's not the timing matters, external factors matters into your decision-making process or into your career trajectory. And making sure that your mentors, your managers, your ecosystem sees that maturity at display. And that comes, I think, from first and foremost, eliminating any sense of entitlement, which I see a lot of younger people sometimes fall in the pit, fall over the sword for, is critical. I think what really gets you closer to people and sort of builds that trust in you and builds your credibility is a sense of professional maturity and understanding that there is what you want and what you aspire to be, and you should obviously go for that, but you should also be very well aware of other stakeholders, circumstances, the business context, external factors that sort of might either get in the way or delay or might make, even sometimes force you to pivot, and that's okay. I see a few people, like almost stomping their feet and sort of getting frustrated and getting stuck when certain decisions have had to be made that are sort of out of their control. And then that affects credibility. That exhibits a sense of immaturity that makes you think twice as a leader of how much you can trust this person, how much you can trust them with a team. And so my advice is maintaining that professional maturity and putting it on show, especially in difficult times, is critical and gives you an immense competitive advantage.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Dali. I think that's a very, very astute and important point. Let's bring it home and wrap it up. I want to quickly talk about next week's webinar, which is also, again, on the Future Proofing series. Our first one, as I said, focused on international development and engineering and energy and infrastructure. The second one was, as we heard today, about small businesses, Fortune 500s, the roads to each one of those ends, and their stories. Next week's going to be about healthcare. I'll be talking to a friend of mine who started a male fertility clinic that's been doing some amazing work on the cutting edge in terms of healthcare and the future of healthcare, and how he's also evolving with the COVID crisis, as well as a friend of mine, which I hope I can secure. He's an ICU doctor in New York at the cutting edge, a frontline worker, and also a really incredible individual that is wearing two hats as a doctor and as a consultant with McKinsey. So we're going to talk to both of them about their path and the future of healthcare, especially in the COVID crisis, under the backdrop of future proofing. So without further ado, thank you guys both so much for being with us today. I think we learned so much about the fields, your respective areas, what we can learn, and how people can leverage and maximize their MBA degree. So thank you both very, very much, and we'll look forward to continuing to hear your stories and your incredible successes in the future.
Thank you so much, Hamada. Thanks, everyone. Take care. Please be well.
Bye.